Do you ever feel like you're just drowning in all the complex global news? Like you're wishing for a quick way to grasp what's really going on beneath the surface. Sometimes the most powerful insights, those aha moments, they come from looking at ideas that, sure, might be a little controversial, but they offer incredible clarity. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the, well, profound and intensely debated ideas of Carl Schmitt. We're focusing particularly on his seminal work, The Concept of the Political, but also bringing in some critical insights from other scholars, too. Our mission really is to navigate Schmitt's core arguments, about the nature of politics, the state, even human behavior. We want to extract those crucial nuggets of knowledge that can really help you become more well-informed. We'll explore his historical context, his pretty potent critique of liberalism, and the enduring, sometimes frankly unsettling, relevance of his thought. So we're diving into Schmitt, a figure who sparks intense debate even today. But before we get to his often radical ideas, who exactly was he? And why does someone with such a controversial past continue to be so relevant?
Right. Well, Carl Schmitt was a truly prominent legal scholar, a leading intellectual in Germany during the Weimar period. That's the time of Germany's first democracy between the two world wars. His intellectual focus was sharply critical of what he saw as the, quote, weakness of the modern liberal parliamentary state. That was a central theme he explored throughout his work, really. Now, it's absolutely crucial for us to acknowledge the deep controversy surrounding Schmitt. I mean, you can't really talk about him without it.
Yeah, the Nazi connection is unavoidable, isn't it?
Exactly. He joined the Nazi Party in May 1933 and became, in the words of one scholar, a kind of self-appointed ideologue of the Nazis.
Mm.
And this affiliation, it makes it incredibly difficult, maybe impossible, to view his work completely objectively. It's also important to note that his basic understanding of the world, including aspects of his anti-Semitism, remained pretty consistent throughout his life. It wasn't just a temporary phase.
Okay, so that's a huge caveat. How then is his work still being discussed?
Well, despite this deeply troubling biography, there's been a significant, you could say, rebirth of interest in Schmitt's work. This interest seems to center around three core questions he really grappled with. First, the complex relationship between liberalism and democracy. Second, how politics connects or doesn't connect to ethics. And third, the surprisingly critical role that the idea of enemies plays in legitimizing a state. He put that front and center.
And it's not just one side looking at him.
No, absolutely not. It's important to understand that scholars from across the political spectrum have found it necessary to engage with his ideas. We're talking thinkers from the Frankfurt School, the Italian and French left, even American conservatives. They grapple with his concepts, sometimes critically, sometimes, finding certain insights useful. It really illustrates his broad, if often problematic, influence.
So just to be clear for everyone listening, our goal here is simply to understand the ideas presented in these source materials. We're not endorsing the man or his actions.
Precisely. We're simply exploring the concepts themselves.
Yeah.
Trying to understand what he argued.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So with that context firmly in mind, if we're trying to understand the political itself, what did Schmitt believe was its absolute defining characteristic? What set it apart from, say, morality or economics?
Well, Schmitt was really looking for a unique, independent criterion for the political. Something truly distinct from moral judgments, aesthetic tastes, or economic calculations. He wanted to get to the very essence of what makes something political.
And he found it in.
And for him, the most radical insight, the absolute core of the political, is precisely the distinction between friend and enemy. He really emphasized this isn't just a metaphor, or a private feeling like disliking someone. It's an existential distinction. It signifies the utmost degree of intensity of people coming together or pulling apart as groups.
Okay, so when he says enemy, he's not talking about just a personal dislike, right? Like someone you argue with online or your annoying neighbor.
Exactly. No, this is key. He's talking about the public enemy, what the Romans called hostis, not inimicus, which is more like a private adversary, a personal foe. For Schmitt, an enemy exists when one fighting collectivity of people confronts a similar collectivity. It's fundamentally about groups, potentially nations or other organized political entities, not individuals feuding.
And what gives this distinction its power, its intensity?
Well, this friend-enemy distinction gains its real meaning, its sharp edge, because it ultimately refers back to the real possibility of physical killing. For Schmitt, war is the ultimate expression of this. It's the existential negation of the enemy. It's about, at its core, life and death stakes between organized groups.
Wow, okay, that sounds incredibly intense, stark even. So how does this very fundamental, almost primal view then connect to the idea of the state and what it means to be sovereign?
Well, for Schmitt, the state is fundamentally the specific entity of a people. It embodies the ultimate authority in decisive cases, the final decider. He argued that, historically at least, the state and politics were indivisibly linked. The state traditionally held a unique monopoly on politics. It was the political actor.
And this friend-enemy thing ties into that.
Directly. A defining characteristic of the state, in Schmitt's view, is what he called the jus belli, the right to wage war. And this right implies a fundamental power, the power to demand from its own members the readiness to die, and on the other side, to unhesitatingly kill enemies. Ultimately, the state is the entity that truly decides who the enemy is. That decision is paramount.
And what about enemies within the state? Does his idea extend there too? That seems relevant.
Absolutely. Schmitt believed a normal state's primary endeavor is to assure total peace within the state and its territory. That's its goal internally. But, he argued, in critical situations, this can also mean deciding on the domestic enemy, identifying groups internally that are seen as posing an existential threat to the state's unity or order.
That leads towards a very powerful state, doesn't it?
It does. And this connects to his concept of the total state, which he saw emerging when formerly sort of neutral domains like religion, culture, education, even the economy, become entirely intertwined with state power and state concerns. In such a state, Schmitt argues, everything is at least potentially political. There's no longer a truly separate neutral sphere. Politics can, and perhaps inevitably does, infiltrate everything.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, because Schmitt definitely wasn't a fan of liberalism. What were his main criticisms of it, especially given his whole view of the political centering on friend-enemy?
Right. He fundamentally believed that liberalism obscured or even tried to deny the true stark nature of the political. For him, liberalism rests on compromise, on discussion, producing what he called temporary, occasional, never decisive solutions. He saw it as substituting procedure for struggle. It wasn't about ultimate decisions or existential conflict, but endless negotiation and process.
Avoiding the hard choices.
Kind of, yes. He argued that liberalism attempts to transform the enemy, which for Schmitt is this existential life-or-death category, into something much less confrontational, much tamer. It tries to turn the enemy into, say, an economic competitor in the marketplace, or simply a debating adversary in the intellectual sphere. It neutralizes the danger, in his view.
So it's like liberalism tries to domesticate conflict, to make it safe.
Precisely. And this leads, he thought, to liberalism's inherent negation of the political, which, in his view, results in a deep distrust toward all conceivable political forces and forms of state. Its entire theory, he argued, is essentially a liberal critique of politics, focused primarily on controlling state power, hedging it in, mainly to protect individual freedom and private property, rather than embracing the need for a strong, decisive political entity capable of confronting enemies.
And this connects to sacrifice.
Yes. From an individualistic, liberal viewpoint, Schmitt found that it simply couldn't logically justify demanding that individuals sacrifice their lives for the political entity. If everything is about individual rights and autonomy, how do you rationally ask someone to die for the group? He felt liberal thought didn't have a convincing answer.
So it weakens the state's core function in his eyes.
That's how he saw it. Ultimately, he believed this created a whole system of demilitarized and depoliticalized concepts. Political battle becomes mere competition or discussion, and the state itself effectively transforms into just society, losing its unique, decisive political character, its ability to face existential threats.
Okay, so if the political is so fundamental, this friend-enemy thing, how did Schmitt see it evolving in the modern world, especially with the rise of technology? This seems incredibly relevant to our current era.
Yeah, he explored this quite deeply, especially in a 1929 essay called The Age of Neutralizations and Depoliticizations. It's a fascinating look at how societies try, often vainly, to escape conflict. He described a theory of historical shifts in what he called the central domains of thought in the West. These are like the dominant frameworks people use to understand their world. He traced it from theology in the 16th century to metaphysics in the 17th, then ethical humanism in the 18th, economics dominating the 19th, and finally landing on technology in the 20th century.
So each era had a sort of dominant lens, a main way of understanding the world and solving problems.
Exactly, and here's the key insight. He argued each of these shifts was driven by a striving for a neutral domain, an attempt to find neutral ground to escape the conflicts and absolute claims of the previous era. Theology led to religious wars, so people sought metaphysics and so on. But, tellingly, he observed that each newly won neutral domain has become immediately another arena of struggle. The search for neutrality, paradoxically, just created new battlegrounds, new forms of conflict.
And technology is the latest attempt at finding neutral ground.
Right. Technology might appear absolutely and definitively neutral because it seems purely instrumental. It serves everyone, right? But Schmitt argued it is not neutral, precisely because it's always an instrument and weapon. You can't derive a political decision from technology itself. It's simply a tool, a means. And the struggle becomes about who controls the technology and for what ends. Its neutrality is an illusion.
He also talked about a spirit of technology.
Yes, the spirit technicity. He saw it as a kind of mass belief, almost a faith in technology. He even called it an anti-religious activism. It's this belief in unlimited power and the domination of man over nature, even over human nature. It's a faith in progress, control, efficiency, above all else, perhaps without considering the political consequences.
And this leads somewhere dangerous.
It leads to his truly chilling observation, which feels incredibly relevant today. Schmitt wrote that when politics gets hidden behind supposedly neutral justifications, you end up where the most terrible war is pursued only in the name of peace, the most terrible oppression only in the name of freedom, the most terrible inhumanity only in the name of humanity.
Wow, that's a powerful and deeply unsettling thought. It seems this deep dive also reveals a darker view of humanity itself. What did Schmitt actually believe about basic human nature? Was it inherently aggressive or something?
Well, Schmitt laid out what Leo Strauss later called his anthropological confession of faith, essentially his fundamental belief about what humans are like, politically speaking. He believed that all genuine political theories presuppose man to be evil. Now, for him, this didn't necessarily mean evil in a specific moral sense, like sinful. It meant dangerous and dynamic. He distinguished between viewing humans as basically risky or harmless creatures.
And he chose risky.
He definitely leaned towards risky. He saw humans as inherently capable of intense conflict, and thus always a potential threat to each other, especially in groups. Not inherently peaceful or cooperative when the stakes are high. He was heavily influenced here by Thomas Hobbes, the English philosopher, whom he regarded as a profound political thinker. For Hobbes, the baseline state of nature is a state of war of individuals, every man against every man. Schmitt sort of adapts this. He sees the fundamental reality not just between individuals, but as a potential state of war of groups, particularly nations or distinct political communities.
So that's the basis for politics, this dangerous nature.
Pretty much. This understanding of man's dangerous, conflict-prone nature is, for Schmitt, the very root of the inescapability of the political. You can't wish it away. In fact, he argued that any true effort to abolish the political entirely, to create a world without enemies, would paradoxically become a political act itself. It would likely lead to an especially intensive and inhuman war against war, because such a war would have to aim to annihilate the very possibility of enmity, perhaps by eliminating those who still hold to political distinctions.
It's rare, really, to find thinkers who challenge such foundational liberal ideas so directly. How did other significant minds, like Leo Strauss, whom you mentioned, engage with Schmitt's work, given its controversial nature and its powerful, unsettling claims?
Yeah, Leo Strauss is a crucial figure here. Their interaction is often described as a kind of hidden dialogue through their writings. Strauss really got under the skin of Schmitt's arguments. For instance, Strauss observed right away that Schmitt's central thesis about the political, the friend-enemy distinction, has a distinct polemical intent. It's consciously setting itself up against liberalism's attempt to negate the political, to make it disappear into economics or ethics.
So it wasn't just a description, it was an argument against liberalism.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Strauss also pointed out something fascinating, how Schmitt restores the Hobbesian concept of the state of nature to a place of honor. He brings it back to the center. However, there's a key distinction Strauss highlights. While Hobbes used the state of nature to argue for a strong sovereign to overcome that nasty condition, Schmitt, on the other hand, seems to affirm the state of nature, the potential for conflict, as the enduring fundamental reality of politics itself. He doesn't necessarily seek to escape it in the same way.
So Strauss is saying Schmitt almost embraced the very conflict Hobbes tried to escape. That's counterintuitive.
Exactly. And Strauss's analysis delves into why Schmitt might have done this. He suggests it stems from a kind of nausea, Strauss felt, over the prospect of a completely depoliticized world, a world which Schmitt seemed to view as ultimately shallow, a world of entertainment, amusement, or one without seriousness. For Schmitt, politics is serious, precisely because it involves the possibility of sacrificing life for what truly matters, the ultimate stakes. A world without that possibility is, maybe, a trivial world.
But Strauss didn't just agree with Schmitt, did he?
Oh no, not at all. Despite understanding Schmidt's critique, Strauss offers a powerful criticism of Schmitt himself. He suggests that Schmitt remained, in a way, trapped within the horizon of the very liberal view of morality he was attempting to attack. He couldn't quite break free from its premises, even in its critique.
Interesting. So Strauss thought Schmitt didn't fully escape liberalism either.
That seems to be the implication. Ultimately, Strauss suggests that maybe Schmidt's true last word, his deepest concern, wasn't just the political struggle itself, but something more like the order of the human things. This hints, perhaps, at a deeper search for pure and whole knowledge, something that extends beyond mere political polemics, suggesting Schmitt was maybe grappling with more fundamental philosophical questions about human existence, not just winning an argument against liberalism.
Okay, this has been a really deep dive, so bring it back to our listeners. What does this all mean for you? Why should you care about these dense, sometimes disturbing philosophical debates from decades ago, especially given Schmitt's problematic background?
Well, I think Schmidt's ideas, even if you disagree with them, offer a potent, maybe uncomfortable lens through which to better discern the conflicts shaping our world today. For instance, how do we identify the friend-enemy groupings that operate, whether they're explicitly stated or just implicitly at play, both within nations and internationally? Are we aware when political actors try to disqualify opponents not just as wrong, but as outlaws of humanity, effectively placing them outside the bounds of normal political contestation?
That language is definitely out there.
It is.
Huh.
And you can also reflect on Schmidt's chilling warning that the most terrible war is pursued only in the name of peace, the most terrible oppression only in the name of freedom, the most terrible inhumanity only in the name of humanity. How can you identify this kind of rhetorical tactic in today's discourse? It's everywhere, from headlines and political speeches to social media arguments.
And the idea of things being presented as non-political.
Exactly. Consider how complex issues, like, say, climate change, migration, or economic inequality, are often framed as purely technical or economic problems needing expert solutions. Does this framing effectively depoliticize them? Does it obscure the underlying political decisions, the power dynamics, and the potential friend-enemy lines being drawn, much as Schmitt described? Who wins and who loses when something is declared technical?
Right, it hides the choices being made.
It can. And finally, if a world without politics is, for Schmitt, potentially one without seriousness, without facing ultimate questions of life and meaning, how do you engage with political questions? How do you discern what truly matters, what has real stakes, versus what might just be entertainment or distraction in the constant noise of daily life and media?
Lots to think about there. As we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave you with a final provocative thought inspired by Carl Schmitt's work. If, as Schmitt believed, a political entity, a state, a people truly exists politically only as long as it has the capacity and the will to determine for itself the distinction between friend and enemy, and if, as he also argued, a true world state embracing all humanity couldn't actually exist politically because it would have no ultimate enemy to define itself against, then what does that suggest about the true drivers of global cooperation and conflict in our 21st century? And maybe more personally, how does your understanding of these potentially underlying friend-enemy dynamics help you navigate a world that often speaks the language of universal peace and human rights, while perhaps still operating, beneath the surface, on principles of existential struggle and group identity?